Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Tim Hourigan, Executive Vice President for HR for Home Depot, who has about 500,000 associates. Prior to serving in his current role as CHRO, Tim was also the president of the company's Southern Division, where he was responsible for sales and operations for more than 690 stores and more than 100,000 associates. Tim also serves on a number of industry boards and is a director on the board of Love's Travel Stops. Tim, it is fabulous to have you back here. I think that you were the last person that we actually did one of these in person, so it's only appropriate that you're the first one back in person. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm surprised you invited me back after last time, but I appreciate it.
Well, we may have lost the video, so it's, we're just trying to fill it.
Understand.
So obviously Home Depot has an amazing culture. And can you say a little bit about how that may have been tested during the COVID crisis or even helped you really get through it?
Yeah, I think of it as it was tested and tested by fire, but not tested in a way to say, boy, is this the right culture? Is this the right approach? It was refined, I guess, is a better way to say it from my perspective. So that what we did during the COVID crisis and still continue to do is we go back to our value wheel. And we look at our core values and say, how does that drive our decision making? Is this in line with our core values? The North Star that we've used in every decision has been the value wheel, and we'll continue to do that.
What are some of the biggest changes that came from the HR function, again, through this? Obviously, the theme for today will be COVID and how you really maneuvered and worked through it, because Home Depot is clearly one of the leading companies that has really dealt with this so well. So can you say a little bit about, maybe in connection with the value wheel that you're talking about, what kind of changes in terms of how you were going forward from COVID, or lessons learned maybe?
Yeah, so I remember distinctly March 13th. It was Friday the 13th, kind of an ominous day, right? And that was when we made the decision that we were going to have to go fully remote on Monday. So if you roll back the tape, and this is 2020, you didn't have the technological support, the capabilities. We hadn't done that before. We didn't have that muscle. We had to build that muscle immediately, and we did. And I think the lesson from an HR standpoint is you need to always be thinking about what's on the horizon that hasn't hit yet, what's around the corner. And obviously no one anticipated a pandemic of this magnitude, but it really taught us that we can respond in an agile way. So from a skill set standpoint, we need to double down and reinvest in training and learning on how do you use the agile decision-making process to make decisions. And in that regard, you think about it in this way. I make a decision today based on the fact set that I have. Tomorrow that fact set will change. So the discipline to say, what are the new facts that might cause you to reevaluate your decision and course correct? That's hard for people to do. And then the last part of that discussion is there's no blame for the decision you made yesterday, because today's fact set is different. So we will make a course correction and feel comfortable that you made a good decision yesterday and you're making a better one today because you have better information.
So when we've talked about that a little bit, about decision making, how do you get that throughout the organization to get your managers to not blame people when a decision goes poorly or doesn't work out after the fact?
One of the things you do is model the behavior. So you celebrate the decision that was made and say, hey guys, we're making a different decision because we have new information, and the team that made that decision want to change the course. And so I applaud the leader of that team. I applaud the team. And you go back to, well, fundamentally what they do, they kept on top of what the fact set was. They kept their eyes open for the changing environment. They were willing to admit that they didn't have the answer yesterday and they need to change it for today. And that's all good things. And you have to role model the behavior. And then you have to ensure that when people fall back into maybe the old practice of who made the mistake and why, you correct that. And you say, hey, we're not here to do that. We're here to learn. But we're not here to say who made the mistake. We're going to celebrate the fact that they made a decision on imperfect data because the decision had to be made at that time.
So it's really focusing on the decision-making process more than the outcome.
I'll give you an example. We had in our Toronto stores in Canada, we were shut down by the province of Ontario. But we were allowed to sell product through curbside pickup. We had no curbside process. We didn't do that. So we had to build a scrappy approach to that right away. And one of the examples is, when you pull into the parking lot, they had cardboard signs that said, when you pull in, call this number and tell us what type of car you're driving, and we bring the product out. Well, if we waited till it was perfect, which is our tendency, we would be 2-3 months into the process before we could solve those customer needs. So you celebrate the fact that, hey, they had a cardboard sign, it was handwritten, it improved, and now we have spots in front of the store when you pull in that's geo-fenced, so that when you come in, I know that you've pulled in, you hit a button, and I bring the thing out to your car, whatever your product was.
So you said it's really important to keep building that skill set of agility. How do you develop that in your 500,000 associates?
Well, we start with the leaders. And fortuitously, we had actually started a learning program 2.5 years before the pandemic. And in that, we were teaching agile problem-solving process. So we had a little bit of a head start. And I'd like to say we were very forward-thinking and we saw this coming. That's not true. But it really paid huge dividends for us. And now we've taken that further into the organization and we'll continue to expand that.
So we've also talked a little bit about in the past about how COVID was really a watershed moment for HR, right? Kind of akin to the way some people talked about IT during the 2000 crisis, et cetera, or 2008 with finance. Do you see that, not just in Home Depot, but elsewhere? Is HR now getting more of the respect that it should have?
Those of us in the profession believe it should have had it, yes. And in many cases did. But what I saw was the elevation, and as I talked to peers in other companies, the elevation of the role and the importance of the communication from the head of HR in tandem with the head of the company, the chief executive officer, the chairman of the board, whoever that happened to be. You saw the HR role elevate in importance in that communication. I think the associates that work in various organizations were looking for someone that they could trust. And quite frankly, in this environment, there's so much information. It changes daily. It's not because people are ill-intended or that they're not competent. The world changes every day. The HR person is the one that helps put that into perspective. And when I talk to peers, whether it's weekly calls, whether it's video messaging, whether it's small group town halls, I think the organizations have looked to their HR leadership to help provide some of that stability in very unstable times.
And are you seeing that same need at the board level also? When you are on multiple boards, but so are you seeing other board members starting to appreciate that, whether it's again at Home Depot or your other experiences?
Yeah, I tell you, the short answer is yes. I think the board is looking for, well, who's taking the leadership in this topic? And by the way, it's ill-defined, it's changing rapidly, it's shifting sands, all those concerns. And they're looking for that credible person that can provide insight in a time when insight is hard to provide. And I do believe they look to the HR person and they look for that credible informational aspect of the role that adds value.
And we're hearing a lot about the pending labor shortages or current labor shortages, and I know Home Depot understands this well. What are things that can be done to actually try to thwart some of those really big challenges that are coming up in the labor markets?
If I had the answer to that, Anthony, we'd be in a different spot right now. But I do think there's a lot of initiatives that you can take. And each company has their own unique approach to it. In our world, it's how do you have outreach where you explain the opportunity within the company. Many companies have frontline roles. And those roles are pretty stable. People stay in those frontline roles until they leave the organization. And they may be short tenured, medium, or longer tenured. The one uniqueness for Home Depot and the thing that we talk about is you have an opportunity to grow your career. So you can start as a cart lot associate, we call it, someone who goes out and gets carts off the lot and brings them in to the store for other customers to use. And you say, well, that's a pretty basic job. I have lot associates that started 5 years ago who are now assistant store managers. And I think you have to paint that picture of how do you grow? How do you have the opportunity to enhance your skill sets? For all of us, no matter which company, I think you have to have that story as you look to attract talent. because there is a shortage of talent. The pandemic, I think, has caused people to leave the workforce, maybe question why they were in the workforce. Maybe they don't want a permanent role. It's more of the gig economy we've heard so much about. And you have to say, well, for some people that's right. But let me talk to you about some other things if you want to look on a longer horizon of how you grow your career.
And how do you really get and develop that through, again, an organization with 500,000 people? Because I know you're very proud of the growth that so many people in the organization have had, and you've bragged about some of the phenomenal wealth that people that started at kind of these people at the very front lines have accumulated over their careers there. How do you develop that ethos throughout the organization to really continually be developing the talent throughout the organization?
I think it starts at the local level. And we're big on storytelling. So if you go into our stores, you will see in the break room a board that talks about the story of each of the leaders in the building. Where did they start? What were their roles as they moved through the organization? We always have the senior leader, and in our case, Anne-Marie Campbell's a great example. We've talked about her before. Anne-Marie is 36 years with the company. She emigrated from Jamaica and started with Home Depot as a part-time cashier. Today she runs all of store operations, and she's responsible completely for Canada and Mexico in addition to the US stores. Great story. And then people say, well, that was 36 years ago. And that's why it's important to say, hey, here's your store manager's story. Your store manager started as a lot associate, and here's how that person moved through the organization. Your ASM, your assistant store manager over your specific function, started working as a cashier, and here's how they've moved through the organization. So it makes it relevant, and like they say, all politics are local. It makes it relevant to that specific market where someone says, oh, the great story about Ann, but I also saw where Donna, who's now my store manager, actually started just like I did 10 years ago.
And shifting just a little bit, but it seems like for many of us outside of some of these organizations that ESG is becoming a much bigger deal in organizations, and boards are starting to pay attention. So kind of starting that, is that true? Is that a fair observation?
Oh, absolutely. And I think from various shareholder initiatives, whether it's some of the large institutional shareholders like Fidelity or BlackRock, been very prominent in pushing companies to do more. And then just the general environment itself. So we talk about the environmental impact companies have and how do they help mitigate the negative implications. Very much a topic at every board member.
And so did the pandemic do anything to highlight that or accentuate that even more, or was that just happening on it anyways?
Yeah, I think it was happening anyway, but where maybe the shift occurred, and the pandemic started in March, and then we had the horrific issues that heightened the awareness of the civil injustices, starting in May with George Floyd's tragic event in Minneapolis. And the board starts asking questions, and that's a great part about our board, and I would assume most boards, is they ask questions. They push you to think differently. They bring an external perspective. And it heightened our awareness, and in fact we set up a separate committee now where a segment of the board actually meets with us on a quarterly basis to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues.
So you have two young sons. They're moving through the workforce now. They're coming up. Given all that's gone on with the pandemic and everything that you're seeing, and you're in touch with the leaders of everything in society, what advice are you giving them about how to live their lives and to make it to make the most of it?
Yeah, well, if they would listen.
I'm not suggesting they listen
okay,
to you. No,
okay,
no.
All right. So my effectiveness is not quite as good as what I think my advice is, so I'll say that. Say a couple of things. First of all, find what you love. Don't worry about, and this, I know it sounds trite and it's a cliche, but don't worry about the money. The money will come. The financial reward always comes. If you're doing something you love, you'll excel at it. And it can be anything. It's more important to be happy in what you do than it is to say, well, how much does this job pay? Or what's the financial reward opportunity in this career path? And it's okay to back up and take a different route. Second thing I tell them is learn from everything you get exposed to. If you have a great boss, learn why that what is it that they do that really motivates you? So that if you move into a more senior role, you can emulate those skills. If your boss isn't good, if you don't, but boy, this person doesn't motivate me. In fact, they demotivate. Learn from that. What did they do? So step above the emotional reaction you're having and try to say, I'm going to codify some of these learnings so that when I get the opportunity to lead a team perhaps in the future, I remember what it felt like. And I'm not going to do that to my team. And it's equally important, whether it's a good boss or a not so good boss. And the last thing is, you got to continue to learn. Think about, and we've talked before about data science. I actually tell them, get into data science. But 10 years ago, the term data science, people would scratch their head and say, oh, so you're talking about a business analyst then, right? That profession has grown so rapidly and is so much more important in business today than what it was. Look for those types of things on the horizon and push yourself to continue to learn. Because when I started, we didn't have laptop computers. Today, everybody has a laptop and everybody has a phone and everybody understands all the new technologies. But if I stopped at the time when I came into the workforce, I would obviously be a dinosaur. And while I may be trending to that, hopefully not there yet.
That's great advice, not just for your sons, but for parents, that I should be remembering some of that for my own children. So, Tim, as always, it's really, truly a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us.
So, Anthony, I always enjoy coming. I always enjoy the interaction, and the students here, unbelievably energizing, so it's my pleasure.
Thank you. You just listened to another CHRO Conversation. Today, Tim Hourigan of Home Depot, a senior business executive who personifies humble leadership, shared his views about how businesses can best support all stakeholders. As you also heard, Tim explain critical lessons learned through the challenges of COVID and how businesses can successfully navigate these polarizing times by continually focusing on the business while caring sincerely and deeply about all of the associates. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.